They said the greatest gift I could give my brother on his wedding day was to vanish. My mother's voice was sharp like glass, cutting clean, and it sliced through the room while everyone watched. My father stayed silent, which hurt worse, because silence is its own kind of betrayal. My brother smirked, satisfied, the golden child basking in the glow of his perfect celebration. And me, I sat there at the edge of that long polished table, 29 years old, heart pounding, trying not to let my face crack under the weight of their rejection. I wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it, but the truth landed like a gravestone in my chest. Their words weren't said in anger or as a slip. No, they were deliberate, cold, and final. Disappear. That was the gift. My absence, not my presence, was the offering they demanded. And in that instant, I realized something that should have been obvious years ago. Their love had never been mine to keep. It was always conditional, fragile, ready to shatter at the smallest inconvenience. I looked at my mother's perfect face, the lipstick unblemished, her eyes gleaming with the satisfaction of control. I glanced at my father adjusting his tie, pretending as if nothing had been said, as if pretending made cruelty acceptable. And my brother leaned back in his chair, grinning like a man who had won a prize. To him, my humiliation was the bow tied neatly on his perfect day. My hands shook under the table, but when I spoke, my voice didn't betray me. "Is that all?" I asked, calm, steady. Nobody answered. Nobody needed to. Their silence told me everything. I stood, slid my chair back slowly, and walked out. I didn't beg, I didn't cry. I packed my things that night, took the keys off the counter, and closed the door with a finality that sounded like a gavel in an empty courtroom. The night air outside pressed against me, cold and heavy. But inside, beneath the ache in my chest, something unexpected stirred, a dangerous, quiet fire. They thought they had erased me, humiliated me into silence. But betrayal doesn't always shatter a woman. Sometimes it sharpens her, chisels her into something stronger, sharper. And as I walked away from the house that had cast me out, I whispered to myself, if they want me gone, I'll give them their wish, but not before I rewrite the story of who truly disappears. The next morning, sunlight poured through the blinds of my small apartment. For the first time in years, I didn't feel trapped behind those slats of light. I brewed coffee in silence, every sip warming me like armor, sharpening me. I wasn't broken. I was awake. That's when I opened the drawer where the papers sat. The joint ownership deed, the account access forms, the codes my father once trusted me with because I was the responsible one. The same responsibility, they mocked me. For the same steadiness, they twisted into dullness. They had forgotten one truth: when you cast out the caretaker, you leave her holding the keys to everything. I logged into the account. My fingers moved across the keyboard like they belonged there because they did. Transfer. Freeze. By noon, the joint account was locked, $178,000 sealed tight. No more endless spending on floral centerpieces, champagne fountains, and glittering illusions for a wedding I wasn't welcome at. Then I pulled out the apartment deed, the one my parents had insisted be in my name years ago because you're the reliable child. They never imagined that signature would one day become my weapon. By evening, I had called the agent. The apartment, the pride they paraded as their family's safety net, was listed. My phone buzzed endlessly. My mother's name lit up 12 times before I silenced it. Her message finally came. "Your little stunt means nothing. You're still nothing. Don't embarrass yourself further." I stared at it for a long moment, then smiled bitterly. If words could bruise, I would be black and blue. But bruises fade. Paperwork doesn't. The city outside thrummed with life, indifferent to my storm. Inside, silence built inside me like a drumbeat. I didn't vanish when they told me to. I shifted into something they couldn't predict, and tomorrow they would feel it. Because I was no longer the daughter they could erase. I was the reckoning they never saw coming. By the time my brother's wedding day arrived, the account remained locked. The property listed and the storm brewing in their lives had only just begun. I didn't show up to the ceremony. I gave them their wish, but my absence was louder than my presence ever could have been. I saw the pictures later, of course. The bride glowing in white, the guests laughing under chandeliers, my parents standing tall with their golden son. and yet, beneath the shimmer, I could see it. My father's eyes were tight, his jaw clenched. My mother's smile was brittle, just a little too stiff. Because while they toasted their perfect son, the money that had fueled their illusions was gone. They had wanted me invisible, and I was. But invisibility, when chosen, becomes its own power. That night, I sat in my apartment with a glass of cheap wine, scrolling through the stream of photographs plastered across social media. Every post screamed perfection, yet I knew the truth. They had borrowed money from vendors they couldn't repay. They had leaned on favors that would soon crumble. My absence was not just physical, it was financial, emotional, structural. I was the quiet pillar they had torn down, and the collapse had already begun. 2 days later, my mother stormed into my apartment unannounced. She didn't knock. She never knocked. Her heels clicked hard against the floor as if she owned the space. Her face was a mask of fury, red blotches rising high on her cheeks. "How dare you?" she hissed. "Do you know what you've done? You've humiliated us." I leaned back in my chair, calm, deliberate. "No," I said softly. "You did that yourselves. I just stopped covering it up." Her eyes blazed, but behind the fire I saw something new: fear. Fear of the bills stacking high, of creditors calling, of the illusion crumbling. She opened her mouth to curse me again, but her voice cracked. She realized in that instant that her power over me had finally broken. When she left, slamming the door so hard the walls shook, I didn't cry. I didn't crumble. I poured myself another glass of wine and whispered into the silence, "This is what vanishing looks like." A week passed. My phone lit up with texts from relatives who had been at the wedding. Whispers had spread. Some defended my parents, parroting their version of the story, that I was ungrateful, jealous, bitter. Others asked me quietly if it was true that I had been the one paying bills all along, that I had been the backbone no one ever acknowledged. For the first time, I didn't shrink from the rumors. I didn't rush to smooth things over. I let the truth hang in the air, undeniable. Because that's what betrayal does. It strips away the lies, leaving only the raw bones of reality. And in those bones, I finally saw myself clearly, not as their shadow, not as their scapegoat, but as a woman who had carried more than anyone should, and who finally set it down. My father tried next. His call came late at night, his voice heavy with something I had never heard before. Not anger, not authority. Desperation. "You don't understand," he said. "This family only survives if we stand together." I closed my eyes. His words, pressing against memories of all the times I had begged for the same unity, when I was left out, when I was called names, when I was invisible at birthdays, graduations, holidays. "You didn't stand with me," I whispered. "You asked me to disappear." The silence on the other end stretched long, brittle. Finally he hung up, and that silence was its own kind of justice. As the weeks unfolded, the wedding glow dimmed. Bills remained unpaid. The vendors grew louder, the whispers sharper. My brother, once the shining sun, found his pedestal wobbling beneath him. My mother, who thrived on perfection, began avoiding public events. My father's voice grew thin when speaking to relatives, his excuses transparent. And me, I grew stronger. Each day felt like reclaiming a piece of myself they had stolen. I ate meals without guilt. I slept without dread. I painted again, my hands steady for the first time in years. The weight was gone, and in its place was a quiet, dangerous kind of freedom. They had asked me to vanish, and I had. But what they didn't understand was that sometimes when you erase someone, all you're left with is the gaping hole of what they once carried. And that hole was now their burden to bear. It was almost poetic, the way things began to unravel. My brother, who had stood at the altar smirking as if life were his stage, found himself cornered just a month after the wedding. Vendors who hadn't been paid started calling him directly. The bank froze additional lines of credit tied to the very account I had locked. And when whispers of bounced checks reached his in-laws, the glossy, picture-perfect marriage began to crack. I heard about it not from my family but from acquaintances who relished the gossip. "Did you see?" one coworker said, sliding her phone across the desk. A headline blared, "Local businessman faces lawsuit from wedding vendors." And there he was, my brother's smug face now splashed across the news for all the wrong reasons. I should have felt pity, maybe even shame. But instead, I felt something colder, sharper, a vindication that hummed in my veins. This wasn't my doing alone. This was years of arrogance, of entitlement finally folding in on itself. Karma had a way of timing things perfectly, and all I had done was step out of the way. Of course, my parents couldn't bear the humiliation. My mother was the first to break, leaving voicemails laced with fury. "You think this makes you better than us? You think anyone will respect you now? You've destroyed your brother's life." Her words tried to sting, but they slid off me like water against stone. I had spent years absorbing their venom. Now I let it drain away. My father tried differently. His message came quietly, his voice weighted. "Zara, families survive storms. Don't let anger blind you. You'll regret this distance one day." I sat with his words, rolled them around in my head, but they rang hollow. Families don't survive by casting out one of their own. Families don't stay whole by building themselves on one daughter's silence. They hadn't just pushed me away on that wedding day, they had declared me disposable. And what they didn't understand was that once someone accepts their disposability, they also accept their freedom. Still, I wasn't heartless. Late one night, I pulled out the old box of photographs I had stashed away, birthdays where I had been cropped out of the frame, family dinners where my smile was the only forced one in the room, graduation photos where my brother stood in the center while I was blurred in the corner. Proof that even when I had been present, I was already invisible. The difference now was simple: I chose it. But betrayal has a long echo. The relatives who once praised my parents for raising a perfect family now questioned why their daughter had vanished. Some whispered that I had run away, others that I had married in secret, and still others that I had lost my mind. My parents clung to those rumors because the truth that they had exiled me was too unbearable to admit. I could have corrected them. I could have screamed my story into the ears of every relative, every neighbor, every friend. But I didn't. I didn't need to. The truth has a way of clawing its way out, and all I had to do was wait. And it came sooner than I expected. One evening, as the sky bruised purple with twilight, I got a call from an aunt I hadn't heard from in years. Her voice was soft, hesitant. "I just want you to know," she said, "that what your parents did was wrong. We all see it now. We see you." Her words didn't heal everything, but they cracked open something in me I thought was gone. Recognition, vindication, the knowledge that no matter how carefully my parents tried to erase me, the outline of who I was still remained bright enough for others to notice. Meanwhile, my brother's perfect marriage crumbled further. The bride's family, humiliated by the financial mess, began pulling away. Lawsuits piled higher, and through it all, I stayed silent, my hands clean. It wasn't revenge in the form of shouting or slamming doors. It was the quiet kind, the kind that lets people fall by the weight of their own cruelty. The kind that leaves you standing tall while they drown in the storm they created. Because they had told me to vanish, and I had. But in vanishing, I became the shadow that haunted every corner of their downfall. The breaking point came on a rainy afternoon, the kind where the sky feels heavy with secrets. I was curled up on my couch with a book when my phone lit up with my sister-in-law's name. I hesitated, then answered. Her voice was sharp, frantic, and trembling all at once. "Do you know what your brother has done?" she asked. I didn't, but I listened. She told me about the loans he had taken in secret, the debts piling up under her family's name, the way he had gambled not just with money, but with trust. Her voice cracked when she admitted that the wedding gifts had already been pawned, that the honeymoon had been funded with credit cards already maxed out. She sounded like a woman standing in the ruins of a castle she thought was solid, only to find it had been built on sand. I should have felt rage for her or pity. Instead, I felt that familiar ache of recognition. She had been deceived the way I had been deceived, promised love and respect, but handed betrayal. "I'm sorry," I whispered. It was all I could offer. After that call, I knew the collapse was complete. My parents, desperate to keep the illusion alive, had mortgaged their own home to cover his mounting debts. The same parents who once told me I was worthless had thrown everything they had into saving the son who had dragged them into ruin. And yet they never reached out to apologize, not once. Instead, they doubled down on the story that I was the ungrateful one, the daughter who vanished. Relatives whispered their versions of the truth, and my parents clung to their role as victims. But each lie they told only made the cracks wider. People remembered the dinners where I had been silenced, the times I had left early, with red eyes, the moments they had overlooked before but now pieced together. Slowly, painfully, the truth took root. One evening, my father showed up at my door. He looked smaller somehow, shoulders hunched, hair more gray than I remembered. He didn't shout, he didn't accuse. He simply stood there in the doorway, drenched in rain, and said, "We need your help." The old me would have folded. The old me would have reached for my wallet, for my heart, for anything to stitch the wound closed. But that version of me had been buried the night they told me I was better off vanished. "I can't," I said softly. "Not anymore." He looked at me, his lips parting like he wanted to argue. But then he saw it, the resolve in my eyes, the fire they had lit when they cast me aside. For the first time, he realized I wasn't coming back. He turned, shoulders sagging, and walked away without another word. I closed the door, gently leaned against it, and let the silence fill the room. It wasn't victory I felt. It wasn't triumph. It was something quieter, deeper. Peace. Weeks turned into months. My brother's marriage collapsed in court filings and bitter separations. My parents lost their house, forced to downsize into a small apartment they once would have sneered at. And me, I built. I built a life that was mine, free of their strings. I found joy in small things, painting on Sundays, morning walks, dinners, with friends who actually wanted me around. But the greatest revenge wasn't in their downfall. It was in my healing. It was in realizing that I had carried their weight for too long, and letting it go had made me lighter than I had ever been. Sometimes I think back to that wedding day, to my mother's cold voice telling me the best gift I could give was to vanish. I smile now because I understand the irony. They thought they were erasing me, but in truth, they erased themselves from my life. And I survived. I thrived. If you've ever been cast aside, if you've ever been told your presence was unwanted, let my story be your reminder. Your worth is not measured by those who fail to see it. Sometimes the greatest act of revenge is simply choosing yourself. So if my words resonated with you, if my pain mirrors even a fraction of your own, I ask you, please, like this video, share it so others can find their strength. Subscribe for more stories that speak to the wounds we carry, and leave me a comment below. Tell me the moment you realized you had to walk away and how it changed you. Because healing isn't quiet revenge. Healing is the loudest victory of all.